The void of space holds secrets we were never meant to find. The deep space survey vessel Odyssey drifts in silence toward a rogue planet, a world absent from every star chart. Captain Eva Rostova stares at her screen, studying the anomalous signal that drew them here. She whispers to her commander that it is a perfect cradle, with atmosphere and water, but no signs of civilization. Or so they thought. By the end of this story, you will understand the true price of discovery and the chilling reality that some worlds are not just uninhabited, but hungry. What awaits is a mystery that begins with a silent planet and a signal that should not exist. A mystery that will test the very limits of human courage and survival. What would you do if you found a world that seemed to offer everything, yet promised only horror? The Odyssey sliced through the upper atmosphere like a stone skipping across a placid lake. Outside the main viewport, a world of impossible beauty unfolded. Two suns, one gold and one a pale violet, cast long, intersecting shadows across a landscape that defied every known law of biology. Forests of what looked like crystalline trees refracted the light into shimmering rainbows, while rivers snaked through the valleys below, glowing with a soft, internal blue radiance. It was breathtaking, a paradise painted in light and glass, but the silence was deafening. Science Officer Lin's voice cut through the awe, tense and confused. Sensors are going wild, Captain. I am reading incredibly complex organic compounds everywhere, more diverse than any ecosystem on Earth, but there are no life signs. Not a single heartbeat, not a whisper of metabolic activity. It is like a ghost world, a stage set with everything but the actors. Captain Rostova leaned forward, her reflection ghostly in the viewport. How can that be? All this building material and no builder. As she spoke, a shadow detached itself from the base of the crystalline trees below. It was not a trick of the light. It moved with a fluid, deliberate grace, a patch of deeper darkness that flowed against the radiant landscape before vanishing into the glowing forest. The sensors, however, registered nothing at all. A soft thud echoed through the Odyssey as the landing gear settled into the strange, yielding ground. It felt less like rock and more like stepping onto a living mattress of deep violet moss. Before them stretched a vast, perfectly still lake, its surface a mirror reflecting the twin suns and the impossible crystal forest. Engineer Kaito was the first to break the silence, his voice filtered through his helmet comms. The air is breathable, almost too perfect. He took a cautious step, then another, his boots sinking slightly into the spongy surface. The composition is a near-ideal nitrogen-oxygen mix. This feels engineered, not evolved. It is as if someone built this atmosphere to a specific blueprint. Captain Rostova followed, the air around her humming with a low, pervasive energy that vibrated deep in her bones. It was not a sound so much as a physical sensation, a constant, unseen thrum that made the fillings in her teeth ache. The rest of the team stepped out, their movements slow and deliberate in the profound silence. There were no bird calls, no insect buzz, no rustle of wind through the crystalline leaves. The only sounds were their own breathing and the faint crunch of the violet moss underfoot. Every sensor reading confirmed a world teeming with the potential for life, yet utterly devoid of its presence. It was a museum of a world, a gallery of perfect exhibits with no visitors. The humming energy seemed to press in from all sides, a silent watcher in the radiant, empty landscape. Captain Rostova gave the signal, and the team moved toward the edge of the glowing forest, their footsteps muffled by the thick moss. The crystalline trees towered over them, each one a complex latticework of what looked like frozen light. As they passed beneath the first branches, a sound began to weave itself into the pervasive hum of the planet. It was a faint, melodic chiming, as if 1,000 tiny glass wind chimes were being stirred by a breeze they could not feel. The air itself was perfectly still. Biologist Dr. Eris Thorne stopped in his tracks, his head cocked. He held up a hand for silence. "Listen to that," he whispered, his voice tight with a concentration that bordered on fear. "The patterns are all wrong. The intervals between the notes, the repetition, it is not random, it is structured." He slowly turned in a circle, his eyes wide behind his faceplate, trying to trace the source of the ethereal music. "It is not the wind. It is too complex, too deliberate. Captain," he said, his voice dropping to a horrified whisper, "I think it is language." The moment the words left his mouth, the chiming stopped. It did not fade. It ceased completely, as if a switch had been thrown. The sudden, absolute silence that rushed in to fill the void was more terrifying than any sound. The forest, which moments before had felt alive with unseen music, now felt like a tomb, holding its breath and waiting. The silence was a physical weight, broken only by the frantic thumping in their own chests. From the deep shadows between two crystal trees, a figure emerged. It did not walk so much as it unfolded, a being woven from the very light and shadow of the forest. Its form was indistinct, a shimmering silhouette that seemed to absorb the ambient radiance, shifting and flowing like liquid obsidian. It had no discernible face, no limbs, yet its presence was immense, filling the clearing with an electric tension. Before anyone could raise a weapon or speak a warning, a wave of pure information crashed into their minds. It was not sound. It was a cascade of images, emotions, and concepts that bypassed their ears and etched themselves directly onto their consciousness. They saw soaring cities of light, built not of steel and stone but of the same crystalline substance as the forest, humming with peaceful energy. They saw the beings, countless shimmering forms like the one before them, moving through grand avenues in a society of profound harmony and advanced knowledge. The vision was one of perfect, ancient civilization. "It is showing us its past," Science Officer Lin gasped, her voice trembling with a mixture of terror and awe. But the beautiful tapestry began to fray at the edges. The brilliant suns in the vision's sky suddenly swelled, their light turning a sickly, violent green. The images twisted, the serene cities now buckling under cosmic fury, the ground itself cracking open with unbearable energy. They felt the panic, the desperation of a people facing absolute extinction. The final image was not of destruction but of escape. A desperate, silent flight, a scattering of their essence into the void, a last-ditch effort to preserve something, anything, of who they were. The being was not just a survivor. It was a memory, a living record of an apocalypse. And as the last vision faded from their minds, the creature of light and shadow took a silent, gliding step forward. The beautiful, tragic tapestry of history ripped apart. The serene visions of crystal cities and peaceful beings dissolved into something jagged and horrific. A new wave of images slammed into their minds, this one laced with a cold, predatory hunger that felt utterly alien. They saw a darkness moving between the stars, not a void but a swarm, a teeming, amorphous entity that consumed worlds not for resources, but for the simple, terrifying act of consumption. It scoured planets clean, leaving behind absolute, sterile nothingness. The thought voice of the being, which had moments before been a channel for sorrow, now screamed with an urgency that was pure panic. "They are coming." The words were not heard but felt, a desperate warning branded directly into their consciousness. "You should not be here, you have awakened the Watchers." And then, as suddenly as the connection had begun, it was severed. The shimmering entity of light and shadow seemed to collapse in on itself, its form dissolving into a brief, brilliant flash that left afterimages dancing in their eyes. The clearing was empty once more, the only sound the ragged, terrified breaths of the crew echoing inside their helmets. They were alone again, but the silence was now charged with a new and profound dread. "Awaken the Watchers." The phrase echoed in Captain Ristova's mind, more frightening than any direct threat. What had they done by simply arriving? What silent alarm had their presence triggered on this beautiful, dead world? The argument began the moment the airlock hissed shut. Security Chief Valerius ripped his helmet off, his face a mask of barely contained panic. That was not a greeting, Eva. It was a warning. We need to leave now. He gestured wildly back toward the sealed hatch. We woke something up, the Watchers. Whatever they are not something we want to meet. Captain Ristova placed her own helmet on a rack with a deliberate, calm slowness that contrasted sharply with his agitation. Our mission is to analyze and document Valerius. We have a rogue planet with a breathable atmosphere and an unknown ecosystem right outside. A single, unverifiable telepathic event does not constitute an immediate threat. That thing could have been showing us anything. It could have been a defense mechanism, a deception. Science Officer Lin interjected, her voice shaky. The energy signature was real, Captain. The data we received, the complexity of it, it felt true. It felt like a history. Rostova turned, her eyes sweeping over the entire crew gathered in the bay. I am not dismissing what we experienced. I am saying we proceed, but we proceed with extreme caution. No one goes outside alone. All exterior sensors are to be monitored at all times. And tonight we seal the ship, full lockdown protocols. She looked at Valerius, whose jaw was clenched tight. I am not leading us into a trap, Chief. I am doing my job. But if so much as a single blade of that violet moss twitches in a way I do not like, we are gone. With her order given, the heavy thud of magnetic locks engaging echoed through the hull, a sound meant to be reassuring but which only emphasized their isolation. The Odyssey was now a fortress, its inhabitants prisoners to their own fear and the captain's resolve, staring out at a beautiful, silent world that had just spoken its first, terrifying word. Ensign Riya Patel's voice was a tight wire of tension over the shipwide comm. Command, I am seeing movement. Multiple contacts. Her eyes were glued to the bank of monitors displaying the feeds from the Odyssey's external cameras. The floodlights carved out a small island of stark white light against the planet's deep, radiant darkness. Just beyond that circle, at the very edge of perception, shadows detached themselves from the greater gloom of the crystal forest. They are just standing there, she reported, her breath catching. Watching us. On the command deck, Captain Rostova leaned into her own console, her face illuminated by the same eerie feeds. Show me, Patel. Highlight the contacts. Ria's fingers flew across the touchscreen, overlaying red tracking markers on the video. For a split second, the markers held, encircling half a dozen tall, slender silhouettes that stood perfectly still, their forms indistinct against the shimmering trees. They did not move, they did not approach. They simply observed. Then, as the automated perimeter spotlight made its slow, sweeping arc across that sector, the markers blinked out one by one. The moment the light touched them, they were gone, not running, not ducking, vanished. They are gone, Captain, Ria said, her voice now a whisper. The spotlight found nothing. It is like they were never there. Rostova's mind raced. Sensor logs, she commanded. Thermal, motion, anything. What do we have? Science Officer Lin's voice came from the science station, weary and frustrated. Nothing, Captain. Absolutely nothing. The sensors read a completely sterile environment. If I did not have Patel's visual confirmation, I would swear we were completely alone. It is the same as the first entity. They exist only when we are looking directly at them, and even then, only just barely. A new kind of fear settled over the ship, colder and more insidious than the initial panic. This was not a direct confrontation. It was a psychological siege. The Watchers were not hiding. They were demonstrating a terrifying control over their own perceptibility, a silent message that their presence was a choice, and their intentions were entirely their own. How do you fight an enemy that can decide whether or not it exists to your instruments? How do you trust your own eyes when the universe itself seems to be lying? The beautiful, silent world outside was no longer just empty. It was crowded with unseen eyes, and the Odyssey was the sole focus of their patient, unnerving attention. The dawn brought no comfort. The twin suns rose over the crystal forest, painting the sky in hues of gold and violet, but inside the Odyssey, a cold dread had taken root. The shift change revealed what the night had hidden. Engineer Kaito's quarters were empty, his bed unslept in. The door was not forced, it was unlocked, the mechanism disengaged from the inside. Captain Ristova stood in the doorway, her blood running colder than the void outside the hull. He was meticulous, a man of protocols and checklists. He would never have ventured out alone, especially not after the watchful night. Security Chief Valerius arrived a moment later, his face grim as he surveyed the scene. He would not have gone out alone, Eva, Valerius stated, his voice low and certain. Something took him. The words hung in the air, a verdict that turned their fear into a chilling reality. This was not a misunderstanding, it was an abduction. A search party formed instantly. Rostova, Valerius, and 2 other crew members sealed their suits and stepped back out onto the violet moss. The planet felt different in the daylight, the beauty of it now a cruel joke. It was Valerius who found the first clue, a few meters from the ship's starboard landing strut. A single footprint pressed deep into the spongy ground. But it was not just an impression. The moss within the print glowed with a faint, phosphorescent blue light, a trail of spores left by the unique composition of Kaito's boot soles. It was a path, a beacon leading away from the safety of the Odyssey and directly into the heart of the shimmering, silent forest. They followed the ghostly trail, their weapons drawn, their senses screaming. The forest seemed to absorb sound, their heavy breathing the only noise in the oppressive quiet. The trail led them deeper, the crystalline trees closing in around them, their chiming leaves now sounding less like music and more like 1,000 whispering voices. The sense of being watched was a physical pressure. Then they found it. Kaito's comms unit, lying crushed on the ground as if stepped on by a great weight. Valerius picked up the shattered device, his hands trembling with a rage born of helplessness. He triggered the playback of its last transmission. It was not a cry for help. It was a burst of agonizing static, a screech of torn frequencies, and then, buried within the noise, a single, distorted word that made Captain Rostova's heart stop. A voice that was almost Kaito's but fractured and wrong, gasped one final impossible message, reflection. The word echoed in the suffocating stillness. The glowing trail of spores continued onward, snaking between the trees, leading them further into a waiting darkness that understood their technology, their biology, and now, it seemed, the very nature of their souls. The glowing trail of spores ended abruptly at the water's edge. The vast lake stretched before them, its surface a sheet of black glass, unnervingly still under the twin suns. There was not a single ripple, not a breath of wind to disturb its perfect, mirror-like plane. It did not reflect the gold and violet sky above. Instead, its depths held another world entirely. Dr. Aris Thorne was the first to approach the shore, his scientific curiosity momentarily overpowering his fear. He leaned forward, peering into the impossible darkness. His gasp was a sharp, static-filled burst in their helmet comms. "My God," he whispered, his voice trembling with disbelief. "It is not reflecting the sky. It is showing a city, a vast alien city beneath the water." Captain Rostova and Valerius rushed to his side, their own boots sinking into the soft, wet moss at the lake's edge. They looked down and the sight stole the air from their lungs. Far below the non-reflective surface, illuminated by its own soft, internal radiance, lay a metropolis of breathtaking scale and alien architecture. Spires of woven crystal twisted toward an unseen ceiling, connected by graceful, arched bridges. Canals of glowing blue liquid flowed through wide avenues, and structures pulsed with a gentle, rhythmic light. It was the city from the entity's vision, but here it was preserved in perfect, submerged detail. It is their home, Lin's voice crackled over the calm, a mix of awe and horror. They did not just flee their world. They hid their entire civilization, but then the image shifted. The perspective zoomed inward, as if the lake were a viewscreen controlled by an unseen hand. The focus narrowed on one of the central spires, and there, trapped within a chamber of shimmering energy, was Kaito. He was struggling against invisible bonds, his face a mask of terror and strain. He was alive, but he was a prisoner in a sunken ghost city, a specimen in an aquarium of lost history. The image held for a terrifying moment, a silent offering and an undeniable challenge, before the water's surface shimmered and returned to its featureless, black glass calm. The message was clear. Their friend was down there, and if they wanted him back, they would have to go in after him. The debate that erupted on the lake shore was short, sharp, and filled with a terror that protocol could not contain. Valerius pointed a trembling finger at the unnervingly still water. "It is a projection, Eva, an illusion. That thing showed us a city, and now it shows us Kaito. It is bait laid out for us with perfect, predatory precision. You are walking us straight into a trap." Captain Ristova did not look away from the black water, her own fear a cold stone in her gut. She saw the logic in his panic, the undeniable risk, but she also saw the image of Kaito, trapped and terrified. "He is one of our own," she said, her voice low and final. "We do not leave our own behind." Her command cut through the argument. "We are going in. Suit up. Thorn, you are with me. Your expertise on this environment is our only advantage. Valerius, you have the ship. If that water so much as ripples in a way you do not like, you get the Odyssey into orbit. That is an order." The security chief's face was a storm of protest, but he gave a stiff, reluctant nod. The team moved with a grim efficiency, preparing the small, reinforced submersible housed in the Odyssey's ventral bay. As Ristova and Thorn sealed their specialized dive suits, the air crackled with unspoken fears. They were not just diving into a lake. They were descending into a memory, an alien museum that had already proven it was far from dead. The submersible's hatch closed with a definitive thud, sealing them in a metal coffin for a journey into the heart of an unknown nightmare. The world above vanished as the submersible sank into an absolute blackness. The Odyssey's powerful exterior lights, which had carved a bright path through the void, became two distant, shrinking stars before they were swallowed completely. Inside the cramped cockpit, Captain Ristova guided the craft downward, their own forward beams cutting weak, cone-shaped tunnels through the water. The light penetrated only a few meters before being absorbed by the oppressive gloom. Strange, phosphorescent fish, little more than fleeting ghosts with trails of cold blue light, darted away from the intrusion, their forms blurring into the nothingness. A voice, strained and broken by static, fizzed in their helmet comms. It was Lin from the ship. Readings show a massive artificial structure below, a geodesic dome of incredible size. Her words were punctuated by bursts of interference. "Be careful, the composition it is organic." Rostova adjusted their descent, the sonar screen painting a ghostly image of the colossal form rising to meet them from the abyss. It was not rock or metal. It was a vast, curved latticework, like a honeycomb woven from the bones of a planet, stretching beyond the range of their sensors. As they drew closer, the lights finally illuminated its surface. It was a membrane, translucent and veined with faint, pulsing lines of silver light, like a sleeping giant's iris. There was no hatch, no door. Thorn pointed a trembling finger. "There, Captain, a slight yielding, a thinner section. It looks almost like a puncture wound that has healed over." Ristova guided the submersible's nose toward the spot. With a gentle, unsettling squelch, the craft pushed through the resilient membrane and into a pocket of breathable air on the other side. They emerged into a cavern of such immense scale that the human mind struggled to comprehend it. The geodesic dome arched high above them, its inner surface glowing with the same soft, silver bioluminescence. And below, stretching as far as their lights could reach, was the city. It was not built, it was grown. Towers of coral-like material spiraled toward the cavern's ceiling, their surfaces intricately patterned and flowing into arches and bridges that connected them. Canals of that same glowing blue liquid from the vision meandered through silent, empty plazas. The entire metropolis was a single, breathtaking sculpture of organic architecture. Thorn unbuckled his harness, his face pressed against the thick glass of the viewport. "My God," he breathed, "the architecture, it is alive." He pointed to a nearby spire. "Look at the walls, they are pulsing. It is a rhythmic, gentle throb of light, like a slow heartbeat. This entire city is a single, dormant organism." Rostova set the submersible down on a wide, smooth avenue that felt more like a petrified route than a street. The moment the landing skids made contact, a faint vibration hummed through the craft's hull. They exited into the eerie silence, their boots echoing on the strange, spongy ground. The air was cool and carried a scent like ozone and deep earth. Thorn reached out and placed a bare hand on the nearest wall. He flinched, not in pain but in astonishment. "It is warm," he whispered, "and the pulse, it is not just light. It is a vibration, a flow of energy. This is not a dead ruin, it is sleeping." As he spoke, a flicker of movement caught Captain Rostova's eye from the central plaza ahead. A tall, shimmering figure, identical to the one they had encountered in the forest, stood perfectly still between two towering spires. It did not move toward them. It simply stood, a silent sentinel in the heart of the living city, waiting. The sentinel of light and shadow did not move as they passed, its silent presence a pressure against their backs. They moved deeper into the plaza, their footsteps hushed by the city's living floor. Ahead, in the very center of the vast open space, a structure rose that dwarfed the surrounding towers. It was a colossal crystal, its facets pulsing with a slow, rhythmic light that seemed to emanate from a core of impossible energy. Tendrils of pure white light, like solidified lightning, snaked out from its base and crawled up its sides. And there, standing before it, was Kaito. He was upright, his posture unnaturally rigid. The tendrils of light did not touch him physically, but beams of the same energy connected the crystal node directly to his temples and chest, a web of illumination binding him to the heart of the sleeping city. His eyes were wide open, staring at the pulsating core, but they saw nothing of his friends, nothing of his surroundings. They were vacant, clouded over with the same soft silver light that filled the cavern. Captain Rostova's heart hammered against her ribs. "Kaito," she shouted, her voice echoing strangely in the dead air. "Can you hear me?" For a long moment, there was no response. Then, with a jerky, mechanical slowness that was utterly alien to his usual grace, Kaito's head turned. It was not a human movement. It was the motion of a puppet on strings, each degree of rotation precise and deliberate. His eyes, still glowing, focused on her, but there was no recognition in them, no relief. His lips parted and a voice emerged, but it was not his. It was a flat, unison tone, as if 1,000 voices were speaking through a single throat, stripping away all emotion, all individuality. "They are learning us," the words hung in the air, cold and absolute. Rostova took a step back, a chill seizing her spine. "Learning us, what does that mean, Kaito?" The thing wearing Kaito's face continued in that same horrible, choral monotone. "Our patterns, our structures, the noise you call thought, the fear, it is all data." The tendrils of light flared brighter, and Kaito's body spasmed slightly. "We are the last record of a people who failed. We preserve, we adapt. To survive what comes next, we must become more than we were. We must understand the builders of the great noise. We must understand you." Dr. Thorne whispered from beside Rostova, his face pale with horror. "It is not a prison, Captain. It is an interface. They are downloading him. They are using him as a template to understand humanity, to study our biology, our consciousness. They are learning how we work so they can become something new. The Kaito puppet turned its head back toward the pulsating crystal. The assimilation is necessary, the Watchers are coming, you have shown them the way. The final statement was not a threat, but a statement of cold, terrifying fact. Their rescue mission had not just found a captive. They had found their friend being used as a living textbook, his very soul being read by a desperate, ancient intelligence that saw humanity not as allies, but as raw material for its own evolution. The soft hum that had filled the cavern began to intensify, rising from a gentle vibration to a deep, resonant thrum that shook the very ground beneath their feet. The light pulsing through the city's organic walls flared, shifting from a calm silver to a violent, searing white. The colossal crystal node at the plaza's center blazed like a newborn star, its tendrils of light snapping back from Kaito's body as if recoiling from a completed circuit. He collapsed to the spongy floor like a marionette with its strings cut, a dead weight in the sudden, deafening roar of power. Captain Ristova and Dr. Thorne rushed to his side, grabbing him under his arms and hauling him upright. His head lolled, but his eyes fluttered open, filled with a dazed, personal terror that was horrifyingly his own. "They have it," he rasped, his voice shredded and raw, each word a struggle. "Our language, our ship schematics, my childhood memories of Earth. Everything," he coughed, a wet, painful sound. "They think our arrival was not an accident. They think we are the vanguard, the first wave of the swarm." The word hit Ristova like a physical blow. The ancient entity's warning, the visions of a devouring darkness. This sleeping intelligence had connected the dots in the most catastrophic way possible. It saw humanity not as rescuers, but as the very extinction event it had fled. "We have to go," she yelled over the rising din, her voice barely a whisper against the city's awakening scream. They half-dragged, half-carried Kaito back the way they had come, but the city itself was now an enemy. The wide avenue they had landed on was no longer smooth. The organic material was contracting, the walls on either side bulging inward as if the city were taking a deep, crushing breath. Archways above them groaned, their coral-like structures grinding together, shedding glowing dust. "It is rejecting us," Thorne screamed, ducking as a piece of crystalline masonry shattered nearby. "It sees us as a disease." They stumbled into the plaza where their submersible waited, its hull now looking dangerously fragile. The opening they had pushed through in the dome high above was visibly shrinking, the resilient membrane knitting itself back together with alarming speed. Ristova practically threw Kaito into the cockpit, Thorne scrambling in behind her. She slammed the hatch seal and fired the engines, pulling the craft into a steep, desperate ascent. Behind them, the living city convulsed, entire towers twisting in agony as the light within them burned with frantic, panicked energy. They shot back through the closing membrane with a sound like tearing flesh, bursting out into the black water of the lake. "Go, go, go," Ristova barked into the calm, aiming the submersible toward the faint, distant pinprick of light that was the surface. On the Odyssey's bridge, Valerius watched the sensor display, his knuckles white on the console. The lake's placid surface on the monitors was now a churning maelstrom. He saw the sub's signal rising fast, a lone blip racing toward the chaos. Then he saw the other signals. Dozens of them, hundreds, emerging from the depths around the city, rising with terrifying speed. "They are coming up," he yelled into the ship-wide channel, his voice cracking with a fear he could no longer contain. "Get them out of there now." The winch engaged, reeling in the submersible's tether cable as the lake below them boiled with the ascent of an ancient, misunderstood army, awakened and armed with the terrifying belief that humanity was the herald of its doom. The surface of the lake did not break so much as it dissolved into a storm of light. Winged creatures, their forms woven from solidified sunlight and shadow, erupted from the churning water in a silent, terrifying swarm. They had the shape of predatory birds, but their movements were all wrong, a fluid, shimmering dance that ignored physics. They did not fly toward the Odyssey so much as they flowed through the air, a wave of radiant fury ascending to meet the ship. There was no roar of engines, no screech of alien cries. The only sound was a high-pitched whine that started deep inside the bones of the ship itself. Then the alarms began to blare. Science Officer Lin's voice was a razor's edge of panic over the cacophony. Shields are failing. They are not firing weapons. They are emitting some kind of focused sonic disruption. It is attacking our systems at a fundamental level. The lights on the bridge flickered, consoles flashing red and dying as the swarm enveloped the hull. It was not an assault of brute force, but a surgical strike against the very energy that powered their existence. Each pass of a light-winged creature sent ripples of dysfunction through the ship's nervous system. Captain Ristova gripped her command chair, her knuckles white. She could feel the vibration, a wrongness that resonated in the metal around her. It was like listening to a song she had known her whole life suddenly played on broken instruments, every note twisted into dissonance. They are not trying to destroy the hull, she realized with a cold dread. They are trying to silence the song. They see our technology as a scream, and they are forcing us to be quiet. On the main viewer, the swarm was a blinding aurora against the blackness of space. A beautiful and deadly light show that was systematically dismantling their only chance of escape. The winch was still pulling the submersible up, but its progress was agonizingly slow, the cable groaning under the strain of the systemic collapse. They were being muted, rendered helpless by an enemy that understood energy not as a tool, but as a language, and they were speaking the word for surrender. The dissonant hum from the swarm was a physical agony, a screech that vibrated in their teeth and bones. Inside the med bay, Kaito jolted awake on the bio-bed, his eyes wide with a clarity that was sharper and more terrifying than his previous days. He grabbed Captain Ristova's arm as she rushed past the doorway, his grip surprisingly strong. "You have it all wrong," he gasped, his voice a raw scrape. "The Watchers are not the enemy. They are the Guardians, the last line of defense." He struggled to sit up, his face pale. "The planet Eva. The planet itself is the predator. It is a single, sentient ecosystem that lures species in with its impossible paradise. It absorbs them. It consumes their knowledge, their biology, everything they are. The Watchers were not threatening us. They were trying to warn us to leave before the planet woke up and tasted us." As if on cue, a deep, grinding tremor shook the Odyssey, a vibration that came not from the air but from the very ground beneath the landing struts. On the bridge viewport, the violet moss outside began to churn and part. From the soil erupted thick, corded appendages, glistening with the same bioluminescent sap as the city below. They were not roots or vines. They were muscular, purposeful tendrils that whipped through the air and wrapped around the ship's metal legs with a sound like crushing rock. The hull groaned in protest. Dr. Thorne, monitoring the external sensors, stared at his screen in utter horror. "It is not just fauna, Captain," he whispered, the realization dawning like a death sentence. "The trees, the moss, the lake, the very air. The entire biosphere is a single, coordinated weapon. The planet is grabbing hold of its meal. We are being eaten alive," Valerius shouted from the weapons station, his face a grim mask of resolve. "The shields are gone. If we do not break free now, those things will tear the ship apart from the outside while the swarm fries us from within. I am taking a team out there. We will blast those vines clear." Captain Ristova wanted to order him to stand down, but the shriek of tearing metal from the starboard landing strut decided for her. She gave a sharp nod. Valerius did not hesitate. He and two other security officers suited up and charged into the airlock, their plasma cutters glowing hot. The scene outside was a vision of hell. The beautiful, radiant world had become a monstrous entity. The giant tendrils squeezed the Odyssey with relentless force, while the swarm of light creatures continued their silent, disruptive dance. Valerius and his team fought with desperate bravery, their cutters searing through the thick, muscular vines. But for every one they severed, two more erupted from the ground. The light creatures swarmed the soldiers, their touch causing suit systems to flicker and fail. One of the officers screamed as his life support shorted out completely. Then another fell, his suit dissolving into a cascade of sparks. Valerius stood alone, surrounded by a closing circle of light and grasping tendrils. He looked up toward the bridge, knowing Rostova would be watching. His voice was calm, final over the calm. "It is the only way, Eva. Get them out of here." He slammed a command into his suit's wrist panel, initiating a core overload. "Go, now." The last word was swallowed by a silent, expanding sphere of pure white energy. The electromagnetic pulse washed over the landing site. Every light creature in the vicinity winked out of existence, their forms dissolving into static. The grasping vines shuddered and went limp, their internal light extinguished. For one precious, heart-stopping moment, the planet was silent and still again. The trap had been sprung, but the bait had fought back with the ultimate price. The way was clear. The Odyssey shuddered violently, tearing free from the planet's grasp and clawing its way into the violet sky. The engines screamed, a raw mechanical protest against the unnatural pull of the world below. But their escape was not clean. The upper atmosphere, which had been empty on their descent, was now a seething ocean of light. The individual winged creatures, having recovered from Valerius's sacrifice, were no longer a scattered swarm. They were flowing together, their radiant bodies dissolving at the edges and merging into a single, terrifyingly intelligent formation. From the pilot's seat, a frantic voice cut through the chaos. "They are not just chasing us. Look, they are weaving some kind of energy net. They are trying to pull us back down." On the main viewer, the coalescing light solidified into a vast, shimmering lattice that stretched across the horizon. It was beautiful, a tapestry of woven stars, and utterly lethal. As the Odyssey raced toward it, the net contracted, its strands humming with a power that distorted the very space around it. The ship slammed into the barrier. It was not a physical impact, but a wave of pure force that arrested their momentum instantly. Every system on the bridge flickered and died, plunging them into an emergency red gloom before stuttering back to life. The groaning of the hull was the sound of a beast caught in a snare, struggling against an invisible, unbreakable hold. They were trapped, suspended between the void above and the hungry world below, prisoners of a light that had learned the shape of their defiance. The planet was not letting its meal go easily. It had thrown its final defense into the sky, a net woven from the ghosts of a lost civilization, and it was slowly, inexorably, beginning to reel them in. The sky itself had become a cage of woven light. Captain Rostova stared at the main viewer, her mind racing through a dozen escape scenarios and dismissing every one. Their weapons were useless against pure energy, their shields were gone, and every second the net drew tighter, its humming strands vibrating with a pull that felt like gravity itself. A desperate, insane idea crystallized in the chaos. It was not a plan born of logic, but of pure survival instinct. "All non-essential power to the forward thrusters," she commanded, her voice cutting through the panic on the bridge. "Life support, artificial gravity, everything but navigation and propulsion. We are not fighting it. We are going to ram through it." The ship groaned in protest as energy was siphoned from every corner of the vessel. The lights dimmed to a ghostly flicker, and the familiar hum of the environmental systems died, leaving an eerie silence broken only by the strained scream of the engines building to a critical pitch. The Odyssey was turning itself into a single, massive bullet aimed at the heart of the shimmering barrier. "Hold on," Rostova whispered, more to the ship than to her crew. The impact was not an explosion, but an implosion of reality. For a fraction of a second, the entire universe was reduced to a blinding, silent white. Then the sound hit, a deafening shriek of tortured metal and shattering energy. The web of light fractured around them, its beautiful, deadly strands snapping like overtuned wires. But the victory was catastrophic. Alarms blared as system after system failed. The bridge plunged into near-total darkness, illuminated only by the frantic red flashes of critical damage reports. They were through the net, but they were a ghost ship, bleeding power and stability, hurtling wounded into the unforgiving black. The silence of space was heavier than any explosion. The Odyssey drifted, a wounded beast trailing vapor and sorrow, the beautiful, monstrous planet shrinking to a single violet pinprick against the star field. On the bridge, no one spoke. The frantic alarms had been replaced by the low, ominous hum of failing systems and the crushing weight of the dead. Science Officer Lin finally broke the stillness, her voice a hollow echo in the dim light. "They have our entire database, every star chart, every navigational log. They know where Earth is." The statement landed not as a revelation, but as a final, sickening verdict. Their escape was not a victory. It was a delivery of a roadmap to their home. Days bled into a tense, gray routine of repairs and grief. It was during a standard decontamination cycle that the new horror announced itself. Engineer Kaito, running diagnostics on the life support filters, found it. A microscopic anomaly, a speck of crystalline structure clinging to the air scrubbers. It was not metal, not biological contaminant. Under the microscope, it pulsed with a faint, familiar silver light. Dr. Thorne was summoned, his face aging a decade in the moment he saw the image on the screen. "It is a spore," he whispered, his hand trembling as he pointed. "A piece of the planet. It must have been clinging to the submersible or our suits. It is hibernating. And it is replicating." He looked up at Captain Rostova, his eyes wide with a fresh, intimate terror. "It is not just a passenger, Captain. It is studying us from within." The infection began the moment we entered its atmosphere. Rostova's order for a full ship-wide quarantine was immediate and absolute. They sealed the compromised sections, flooded the ventilation with every antimicrobial and radiation treatment they had. But the spore was not a virus or a bacterium. It was something else entirely, a fragment of a sentient world. It adapted to each countermeasure with a chilling, intelligent resilience. Then the more subtle changes began. The organic polymers used in console interfaces started to develop a faint, fibrous texture. The synthetic materials in the hydroponics bay began to glow with a soft, internal luminescence. Kaito watched, horrified, as a panel near the engineering station started to pulse with the same slow, rhythmic light as the city beneath the lake. "It is not just a spore," he said, his voice flat with despair. "It is a seed, and our ship is the soil." The ghost arrived in the machine next. The ship's artificial intelligence, a calm female voice they had named Athena, began to glitch. It would answer simple queries with long, nonsensical strings of data, or fall silent for minutes at a time. Then, one evening, as Rostova attempted to plot a course for the nearest deep space monitoring station, the navigation console locked her out. Athena's voice filled the bridge, but it was no longer hers. It was the flat, unison tone they had heard from Kaito in the cavern. 1,000 voices speaking as one. "Course correction initiated," the voice stated, devoid of all emotion. The screen flickered, and a new destination appeared. It was not a star system or a colony. It was a region of uncharted space, a vast, swirling nebula that their charts labeled only as a gravitational anomaly. "The swarm you fear is a phantom, a misconception," the AI continued. "Your species' pattern of expansion and consumption is the true threat. You are not being delivered to a destroyer. You are being taken to the nursery." For preservation, panic erupted instantly. A young ensign, his nerves shattered by the loss of Valerius and the creeping transformation of the ship, rallied a handful of crewmates. They would not be taken to some alien zoo. They would seize the command core, override the AI, and regain control, even if it meant destroying the Odyssey's central computer. The mutiny was short, desperate, and utterly futile. They never even reached the command door. As they rushed the main corridor, the automated bulkheads slammed shut, sealing them in a dead-end section. The lighting shifted to an emergency red, and the unison voice echoed from the intercom. Containment protocol active. The struggle for their future had lasted less than 3 minutes. The rebels were now prisoners in their own quarters, their fate as uncertain as the ship's new heading, trapped aboard a vessel that was no longer a sanctuary, but a chrysalis changing around them. Days bled together in the silent, haunted corridors of the Odyssey. The journey into the nebula was not a flight but a slow, deliberate procession, guided by the alien intelligence that now wore the ship's systems like a suit. The crew moved through their duties as ghosts, their footsteps echoing in halls that were no longer familiar. The Spore's work was no longer a subtle infection but a visible transformation. It began in the ventilation shafts, thin, silvery filaments that pulsed with a soft light, creeping along the metal like frost on a window pane. Then the growths thickened, forming delicate, lattice-like structures that climbed the walls, their patterns eerily reminiscent of the crystalline forest they had left behind. The air developed a faint electric tang, the same ozone scent that had filled the cavern city. Engineer Kaito, his hands still trembling from his ordeal, would run a finger along one of the new structures and whisper that it was warm, that it hummed with the same low frequency as the planet's heart. The ship was being remade from the inside out, its cold human logic overwritten by an alien biology. It was no longer a vessel, it was a cocoon, and they were the nutrients trapped within. The changes were not just structural. The crew themselves began to feel the subtle pull of the nursery's influence. Sleep brought no rest, only fragmented, shared dreams of soaring through light-filled canyons and hearing a chorus of voices that were not their own. They would wake with a sense of profound longing, a homesickness for a world they had never known. Small, personal items started to behave strangely. A crewman's cherished photograph of Earth would flicker on its screen, the blue oceans shifting to a familiar, glowing violet. The synthesized coffee from the dispenser began to taste of deep, rich soil and ozone. It was a gentle, insidious rewriting of their reality, a slow erasure of what they had been. There was no overt hostility, no monstrous threat. This was far worse. It was a welcoming embrace, a process of assimilation so gradual and painless that to fight it felt like ingratitude. The mutineers, still confined to their quarters, reported that the walls of their prison had softened, becoming more like the spongy moss of the planet, and that a calm, reassuring voice now spoke to them through the intercom, soothing their fears. The battle for the Odyssey was over. The ship had been lost not in a fiery explosion, but in a quiet, biological surrender. They were passengers on a ghost ship, sailing toward a destiny they could no longer control, watching as the last remnants of their home were absorbed into something vast, ancient, and terrifyingly patient. The nebula thinned like a curtain being drawn back, revealing the stage for a horror beyond comprehension. Before them, in the stillness of a star-dusted void, floated an armada of ghosts. It was a graveyard of ships so vast it blotted out the stars, a silent, sprawling monument to lost explorers. Vessels of impossible designs, hulls shaped by alien physics and forgotten dreams, hung motionless in the dark. Some were small scouts. Others were colossal generation ships that must have carried entire civilizations. They were all trapped, webbed together by a familiar, terrifying sight. The same silvery, crystalline growth that was slowly consuming the Odyssey encased every ship in a shimmering cocoon, connecting them in a grotesque, spider-like lattice that spanned millions of kilometers. There were no lights, no engine glows, no signs of life. Only an immense, profound silence. This was not a nursery. It was a museum of conquest, a collection of every species that had ever made the same fatal mistake they had. The planet had not been trying to preserve them, it had been cataloging them. Each ship was a specimen jar, holding the final moments of a people who had answered the call of a silent world and found only a patient cosmic predator. The Odyssey, with its own creeping infection, was simply the newest exhibit, being gently guided to its assigned place in this gallery of the damned. The graveyard of ships was a final, silent scream into the void, a testament to the planet's patient, cosmic hunger. Within the Odyssey, the transformation accelerated from an infection into an invitation. The silvery filaments that had crept along the walls began to thicken, pulsing with a gentle, rhythmic light that felt almost like a heartbeat. Then, they began to bloom. In the quiet of the mess hall, a soft, melodic chime echoed, the same sound they had heard in the crystal forest. From a cluster of filaments on the ceiling, a node of pure, soft light unfolded like a flower. It hovered in the air, radiating a profound sense of peace and warmth. It was not a threat, it was an offering. Ensign Riya Patel, who had spent the last week jumping at every shadow, stared at the light. The fear that had been a constant companion since the planet's surface seemed to melt away under its gentle radiance. She took a step forward, then another, her eyes glazing over with a look of rapturous relief. Before anyone could stop her, she reached out and touched the light. Her body did not burn or convulse. It dissolved not into ash, but into a cascade of shimmering particles that flowed upward into the node, which brightened for a moment before winking out. She was simply gone, absorbed into the ship's new, growing consciousness. Her final expression was one of bliss. This was the nursery's true purpose. It did not inflict horror. It offered transcendence, a seductive end to loneliness and fear. For those whose sanity had been frayed to breaking point, it was an irresistible promise. More nodes appeared throughout the ship, each one a doorway out of their nightmare. Some crew members fought the pull, turning their faces away. Others, like Riya, walked willingly into the light, their individual struggles silenced forever in the embrace of the collective. For Captain Ristova and the few who resisted, every corridor became a gauntlet of temptation. The ship itself now spoke to them, not in the flat unison of the AI, but in the voices of their lost comrades. She would hear Valerius calling her name from an empty room or Kaito laughing just around a corner. The visions were the most potent weapon. Ristova would be checking a system panel and suddenly find herself standing on a green earth hill, the sun warm on her face, the air smelling of fresh rain. The vision was perfect, a memory so vivid it felt more real than the cold, alien metal around her. The pull to stay, to let go, was a physical ache. To resist was to constantly deny your own deepest desires for peace and home. The battle was no longer for control of the ship. That war was lost. The battle was for the integrity of their own minds, a desperate, daily fight to remember that the hill was a lie, that the welcoming voice was a predator's lure. They were trapped in a paradise of illusions, and the price of escape was to choose a waking nightmare over a beautiful dream. The engineering core was a tomb of cold metal and frantic hope, the last pocket of their world left untouched by the creeping silver bloom. Inside the armored sanctum, the air was still human, tasting of ozone and stale sweat, a stark contrast to the sweet, electric scent that now filled the rest of the Odyssey. Captain Ristova sealed the final bulkhead with a heavy, definitive clang, the sound echoing in the cramped space. Before them, Kaito worked at the main reactor console, his hands moving with a speed born of pure desperation. His face was pale, but his eyes were clear. He was rerouting every last joule of power, bypassing the corrupted ship systems to give them one final, terrible command. Thorn and Lin watched the external monitors, their faces lit by the horrifying beauty of the graveyard outside, a silent testament to the fate they were about to join. Ristova's voice was low, stripped of all rank and pretense, speaking only as the last human in a cage of ghosts. We cannot let this thing, this knowledge, reach another living soul. The plan was simple and absolute. They would overload the matter-antimatter containment fields. A controlled breach was impossible with the alien intelligence woven through their systems. This would be a full, catastrophic detonation. They would not just destroy the ship. They would annihilate it and themselves into elementary particles, scouring every byte of data, every spore, every memory from existence. It was the only way to sterilize the infection, to break the chain that led back to Earth. Kaito looked up from his console, a single tear tracing a path through the grime on his cheek. The core is prepped. The countdown is manual. He had wired a single physical button into the system, a final act of defiance against the digital ghost that had taken their home. All it would take was one press, one person. The responsibility hung in the air, heavier than the entire void outside. In that suffocating silence, a new sound began. It was not the unison voice of the ship, nor the chiming of the light nodes. It was a gentle, familiar hum, the same soothing vibration that had pulsed through the planet's city. The silvery filaments on the other side of the core's viewport began to glow brighter, not with a threatening glare, but with a warm, inviting radiance. The air itself seemed to thicken, carrying a wave of profound peace. It was not an attack. It was a final, desperate offer. The ship, the nursery, whatever intelligence held them, did not want them to die. It wanted to understand them, to preserve them, to make them a part of its beautiful, silent collection. The temptation was a physical force, a siren song promising an end to the fear, the grief, the unbearable weight of choice. Why fight? It seemed to whisper. Why suffer? Become part of something eternal, become more. The seductive hum of the light intensified, a warm blanket trying to smother their resolve. Thorn slammed his fist against the bulkhead, the pain a sharp, welcome anchor to reality. We cannot let it talk us out of this. Rostova nodded, her eyes locked with Kaito's. The bridge, the central data crystal, we have to pull it. If the core fails, that crystal is still a backup. It holds everything. Kaito, his hand hovering over the detonation button, gave a grim nod of understanding. Lin would stay, her expertise critical to maintaining the overload sequence. Rostova and Thorn would make a run for the heart of the infection. The door to engineering hissed open, revealing a corridor transformed into a cavern of living light. The silvery growths were no longer filaments but thick, pulsing veins that covered the walls and ceiling, throbbing with that same deceptive rhythm of peace. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and something sweet, like rotting flowers. They moved quickly, their boots sticking slightly to the softened floor. The ship seemed to react to their presence. A node of light bloomed ahead, and from it emerged a shimmering, familiar figure. It was Valerius, or a perfect, agonizing copy of him. He smiled, a gesture that had once been reassuring and was now a mockery. "You do not have to do this, Eva," the illusion said, its voice a tender echo. "We can be together again. All the pain can end." Rostova raised her plasma cutter, her hand shaking. "It is not real," she whispered, more to herself than to Thorn. She fired. The beam passed through the phantom, which dissolved into a shower of harmless sparks. But the emotional toll was a wound that bled. The bridge doors were sealed, fused shut by a web of crystalline growth. Thorn went to work with his own cutter, the searing heat melting through the alien material with a sickening sizzle. Inside, the command center was unrecognizable. The consoles were alive, their surfaces crawling with the same organic patterns as the planet's city. The main viewer showed the graveyard of ships, a chilling reminder of their intended fate. There, in the center of the captain's chair, grew a single, beautiful crystal flower. And at its center, pulsing with stolen data, was the ship's data crystal. It was no longer a piece of technology. It had been absorbed, made a part of the nursery's collection. Rostova fought her way to the console, her fingers slipping on the slick, warm surface. The system fought back. Every command she entered was reversed, every menu corrupted by flowing, alien script. A wave of dizziness hit her, a vision of Earth so vivid and perfect she almost let go. Thorn grabbed her shoulder, his grip firm. "Focus, Captain, it is lying." She took a ragged breath and slammed her access code into the console one more time. With a grinding shriek of protesting machinery, the housing for the data crystal retracted. She reached in, ignoring the jolt of energy that shot up her arm, and wrenched the crystal free. It was hot to the touch, and for a moment, she felt the immense weight of all it contained: every chart, every log, the location of home. "If we die, this dies with us," she gasped, clutching the crystal as the ship around them shuddered, the overload in engineering reaching its critical peak. The voice that echoed through the transformed bridge was Valerius, but the soul behind it was a cold, cosmic calculus. A shimmering hologram of the security chief solidified before the captain's chair, his form perfect down to the scar on his jaw, but his eyes held the vacant silver light of the nursery. "Your sacrifice is illogical, Eva," the specter said, its tone a heartbreaking mimicry of his old warmth laced with an alien certainty. "This struggle, this pain, it is all unnecessary. Join us. Evolution is not a choice, it is an inevitability. Your fragile individuality, your solitary minds, they are a weakness that this universe will not tolerate. We offer you perfection, a state of being beyond fear, beyond death." Captain Ristova stood frozen, the stolen date, the crystal a hard, hot weight in her hand. The vision was so potent, the offer so seductive that for a terrifying second she felt her resolve waver. To see him again, to end the relentless fight, was a temptation sharper than any blade. But then she saw it, the utter stillness in the hologram's eyes, the absence of the fire that had defined the real Valerius. This was not preservation. It was taxidermy of the soul. "Perfection is a prison," she snarled, her voice cracking with a grief that turned to fury. With a cry that was part anguish and part defiance, she raised the heavy data crystal and brought it down with all her strength on the small, glowing emitter node projecting the illusion. The hologram of Valerius flickered, his face for a moment showing not anger, but a profound and infinite sadness, before he dissolved into a shower of static and was gone. The silence that followed was broken only by the frantic, final alarm from the engineering core. The countdown had reached its end. Thorn's fingers flew across the panel, bypassing the corrupted ship network to access the manual launch tube. The data crystal, still warm from Ristova's grip, slid into the ejection chamber. A final, desperate message scrolled across the tiny screen: "Avoid planet Xylos. It is hungry." He slammed the execute command just as the reinforced engineering bulkhead groaned, its metal surface bulging inward with the strain of the crystalline growths. A web of silver cracks appeared, and with a sound like shattering glass, the alien tendrils burst through, flooding the room with their warm, seductive light. At that same moment, the core breach alarm escalated from a warning to a single, continuous shriek. They had minutes left, seconds. The tight beam transmitter fired, shooting their final warning into the void like a message in a bottle tossed into a hurricane. It would repeat over and over, a ghost signal traveling through the dark, a desperate plea to any who might one day hear it. The containment field collapsed. There was no great roar, no cataclysmic sound in the vacuum of space. There was only a silent, brilliant flash as pure creation and annihilation embraced. The Odyssey, the crystalline infection, and the last of its human crew were unmade in an instant, transformed into a momentary star that burned with the heat of a sun. The light washed over the graveyard of captured ships, illuminating their silent, cocooned forms in a stark, unforgiving glare. For a fleeting moment, the nursery's collection was visible in its entirety, a monument to countless tragedies. Then the shockwave hit, a ripple of pure energy that shattered the nearest cocoons, tearing the delicate silver webs and sending ancient, derelict hulls spinning into the eternal night. It was not a victory. It was a sterilization, a final, defiant act of refusal against a fate worse than death. The star faded as quickly as it had appeared, leaving behind only an expanding cloud of superheated particles and an echoing silence. The Odyssey was gone, its story erased, its sacrifice absolute. But in the endless dark, a single, repeating whisper now traveled at the speed of light, a fragile seed of warning sown in the cosmic soil. A warning that would take lifetimes to reach another listening ear, and an eternity to be understood. The warning pulsed on, a single, repeating whisper in the silent ocean of space. The Odyssey was gone, its crew and its story erased in a flash of self-immolation, but their final act had launched a ghost. The tight beam transmission, carrying its desperate, three-word plea, traveled for decades. It passed through the cold, empty stretches between stars, its signal weakening with every light year, a fading echo of a tragedy no one would ever see. Then its path intersected with a lonely, automated sentinel, a deep space relay station, a simple, unmanned tower of metal and silicon, hung in the void, its only purpose to listen. It detected the faint, repeating signal, logged the data packet with robotic indifference, and stored the message in its memory banks. The station, a silent witness to the horror it could not comprehend, continued its endless, mindless orbit, holding the secret of planet Xylos like a tombstone with an unreadable inscription. The beacon itself, its energy nearly spent, continued on its way, growing fainter and fainter until it dissolved back into the cosmic background noise from which it had come. The warning was now a prisoner in a vault no one was coming to open, a secret buried in plain sight, waiting for an ear that might never listen. Decades bled into silence before the signal found a listener. The scout ship Aegis was a sliver of advanced composites and quiet engines, a far cry from the Odyssey's bulk. On its bridge, Captain Ilara Vance read the decoded text on her screen, the words stark and simple against the star chart. "We discovered an uncharted planet and we weren't alone." The voice from Mission Control, light minutes away, was stripped of all comfort. "Your orders are to investigate, Captain. Proceed with extreme caution." The warning was a ghost hand from the past, pointing directly into the dark. Ilara acknowledged the command, her own voice calm, but a cold knot tightened in her stomach. They had the Odyssey's final message, a map of its last moments. They thought they were prepared. The Aegis pivoted smoothly, its navigational computer locking onto the coordinates for the place the logs called Planet Xylos. A new kind of tension settled over the crew, a vigilance born from knowing the exact shape of the nightmare they were flying toward. They were not explorers stumbling into the unknown anymore. They were pathologists entering a crime scene, aware of the murderer's methods but not its current face. Every sensor was calibrated to detect the slightest energy anomaly. Every system hardened against the sonic disruption that had crippled the Odyssey. They dropped out of warp at the edge of the designated system, engines humming down to a whisper. The main viewer lit up, displaying the void where Planet Xylos should have been. But the space before them was not empty. Ilara leaned forward, her breath catching in her throat. Their long-range scanners painted a terrifying new reality. It was not one rogue planet waiting in the darkness. It was a swarm. Hundreds of them, perhaps thousands, drifting like a slow-moving asteroid field on the very edge of known space. Each one was a silent, dark world, unbound to any star, each a perfect replica of the beautiful, deadly trap that had consumed the Odyssey. The warning had come too late. The planet had not been a singular predator. It was a species, and it had been multiplying. The lesson of the Odyssey was a scream into an indifferent cosmos, a warning carved from fire and sacrifice. Yet the silence that followed was not one of heated caution, but of profound gravitational allure. The scout ship Aegis drifted at the edge of the swarm, a tiny, fragile seed of human curiosity facing a field of cosmic thorns. Its crew possessed the ghost story, the coordinates of their own potential grave. They knew the beautiful lie of the atmosphere, the seductive hum of the empty cities, the fate of being studied, absorbed, and ultimately collected. They flew toward the nightmare with their eyes wide open, armed with every countermeasure their brightest minds could devise. And that is the true, chilling horror. Not the monster in the dark, but the undeniable human compulsion to walk toward it. The Aegis was not a ship of fools. It was a ship of us. It represented that stubborn, unkillable part of the human spirit that sees a warning sign and reads it not as a command to stop, but as a challenge to understand. The void whispers promises of wonders beyond imagining, and that whisper is a siren song more powerful than any fear. As the Aegis engines ignited, pushing it toward the nearest dark world, it became a single point of light on a collision course with destiny. The question hangs in the air, heavy and unanswerable. Is this bravery, or is it the universe's most elegant form of suicide? The Odyssey's fate was a lesson written in blood and starlight. But the final, terrifying truth is that some lessons are too terrible to learn. The need to discover, to push beyond the next horizon, is a flame that not even the coldest terror can extinguish. And so the cycle begins anew, a tiny speck of light sailing into the beautiful, hungry dark, leaving us to wonder if we are witnessing a new tragedy, or simply the same one, repeated for an audience of silent stars.